Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're unpacking an incredibly fascinating, yet honestly, kind of terrifying topic: the hidden science of water damage. We usually think of water as, life-giving, but when it gets trapped inside your home, it becomes a relentless destroyer. Specifically, we're going to look at how this uniquely affects properties in the Fairfield and Butler County area of Ohio. Because, as you'll see in this explainer, this isn't just about mopping up a spilled glass of water. It's a complex, high-stakes battle of physics, chemistry, biology, and most importantly, time.
Just think about that for a second. Your home is this highly engineered envelope, built specifically to keep the elements out. But what happens when the water's already inside? Well, a sudden water crisis is an urgent, time-bound nightmare. Whether you're sleeping, at work, or just sitting in the very next room, water begins a relentless, high-speed assault on your property the precise fraction of a second it escapes a pipe or breaches a foundation wall.
Okay, let's dive into this four-part survival guide. We're going to cover 1. The Fairfield water trap. 2. The clock is ticking. 3. The three-phase rescue. And 4. Science, standards, and insurance. We're going right from the environmental setup to the final stages of a scientific rescue. Let's get right to it. Section 1. The Fairfield water trap. Why local geography makes properties vulnerable. Because long before a plumbing fixture ever fails, the environment around your house is already acting as a silent antagonist. You see, Fairfield sits right down in the Great Miami River Valley, which means our soil is incredibly clay-heavy. Instead of absorbing rainwater, this dense clay basically acts like a giant underground swimming pool. When heavy rain hits, that water gets trapped, pushing straight against your foundation with immense hydrostatic pressure. Think of it like a massive hydraulic press constantly squeezing the walls of your basement. We actually see this groundwater intrusion happen a lot near places like Joyce Park during the spring thaws. Add in the classic Ohio weather, where you can literally experience all 4 seasons before Tuesday dinner, and you get brutal freeze-thaw cycles. Water expands when it freezes, right? So that cracks foundations, creates ice dams, and violently bursts pipes. And because of the area's older housing stock, a lot of homes lack modern vapor barriers, making them exceptionally vulnerable to all that heavy valley humidity. Now, to really put this vulnerability into perspective, 80. That's the number of gallons sitting inside a standard large residential water heater right now. When the steel tank of a water heater eventually corrodes and fails, which, by the way, it almost always does completely silently, usually while you're fast asleep, it can dump up to 80 gallons of water directly into your living space. Within minutes, that massive volume of water spreads across floors and begins to wick up into your drywall. Through a fascinating process called capillary action, drywall actually absorbs water against gravity, sucking it upward, kind of like a giant paper towel. Moving on to Section 2. The clock is ticking, the critical timeline of disaster mitigation. Because once that water hits the floor, the environment inside your home shifts drastically, and a brutal countdown begins immediately. This timeline is absolutely crucial. It's literally the difference between a quick, manageable cleanup and a total structural loss. Professional responders aim to be on site within 90 minutes. Now, why the incredible rush? Because of that terrifying 24 to 48-hour window. Microscopic mold spores are actually floating around in the air around us all the time, completely dormant. But the exact second they meet stagnant water inside a warm house, they activate and multiply aggressively. If water isn't extracted before that 48-hour mark, you're almost guaranteed a mold infestation. After rapid extraction, we enter a 3 to 5 day period dedicated purely to structural drying, pulling moisture from deep within the building materials. If everything goes perfectly, full completion of the project takes about 7 to 10 days. And there's a really vital distinction here that brilliantly illustrates something that often confuses property owners when they're in a total panic: mitigation versus restoration. Think of mitigation as stopping the bleeding in a medical emergency. It's the immediate extraction of water, deploying dehumidifiers, and protecting the areas of the house that haven't been touched yet. It absolutely must happen first. Restoration, on the other hand, is healing the wound. That's the reconstruction phase, replacing the drywall, painting, and installing new flooring to bring your property back to how it was before. You simply cannot heal the wound until you stop the bleeding. So how exactly do the pros stop that bleeding? Section 3, the three-phase rescue, the scientific drying process. Here's where we shift away from the sheer panic of the disaster and break down the highly methodical rescue protocol. Here is the rigorous 3-phase rescue protocol used by the experts. Phase 1 is emergency removal. And look, we aren't talking about your standard household wet vacs here. These are massive truck-mounted extractors that generate immense vacuum power. They can literally pull gallons of water straight through thick carpet and padding before it even has the chance to travel into the walls. Phase 2 is where the invisible work happens, setting up industrial dehumidifiers and air movers and carefully monitoring the environment every single day. And Phase 3, as we just discussed, is the final restoration and reconstruction. Now, what's really interesting here is that drying out a home relies on a hard science called psychometria. It's not just, plugging in a few box fans, cracking a window, and hoping for the best. Technicians essentially act as environmental engineers. They mathematically calculate the exact temperature, humidity, and material saturation to force water to evaporate. They use psychometric calculations to manipulate vapor pressure, figuring out exactly how many dehumidifiers are needed to pull moisture out of the air and the structure, all without drawing things out so fast that your hardwood floors warp, crack, or swell. And they never, just rely on what they can see. Technicians deploy advanced tools like thermal imaging cameras. These infrared cameras read subtle temperature differentials, essentially hunting down hidden moisture that the naked eye just cannot see. We're talking about cool water trapped inside dark wall cavities or soaked deep underneath subfloors. By carefully moisture mapping the entire property, they prevent secondary damage, making sure no damp spots are left behind to silently breed mold or rot out the structural wood framing of the house. All of this science is governed by some pretty strict rules, bringing us to Section 4, Science, Standards, and Insurance, the rigorous standards required to save a property. You see, in states like Ohio, there actually isn't a specific state-issued license required for water damage restoration. Crazy, right? So property owners need a reliable baseline to ensure a legitimate, safe cleanup. And that baseline is the IICRC S500 standard. If a company follows this protocol, it means their technicians are formally trained in everything we just talked about: psychrometry, proper equipment placement, and absolutely crucial contamination control. For instance, they know that clean water from a burst pipe requires entirely different safety and disposal protocols than grossly contaminated water from a sewer backup, which, as you can imagine, carries dangerous biohazards that can cause serious illness if mishandled. Adhering to these standards is also absolutely critical for your insurance coverage. It's a harsh reality check for a lot of homeowners. Standard policies usually only cover sudden and accidental damage, like that burst pipe or the catastrophic water heater failure we mentioned earlier. But if you have a neglected leak that's been dripping behind a wall for months, or if ground surface water floods your basement because of that dense clay soil pressing against your foundation, that is typically not covered without a completely separate flood policy. Plus, insurance adjusters strictly expect restoration work to follow those S500 protocols, requiring daily drying logs and thermal photos. Without that scientific proof, claims can easily be denied. So, the crucial point really boils down to this. Every hour of delay adds thousands to repair costs and increases mold risk. Whether it's the 80 gallons from a busted water heater or a flooded basement from an overwhelmed sump pump, waiting is literally the most expensive mistake you can make. The longer water sits, the deeper it penetrates through that capillary action, breaking down materials exponentially and creating the perfect 48-hour breeding ground for biohazards to thrive. Which leaves us with this final thought. Just take a look around your space right now. Consider the clay soil outside, the age of your plumbing, the incoming weather reports. If a pipe bursts tonight and the clock starts ticking, are you prepared to stop the damage? Understanding the science is absolutely your first and best defense. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to go check your property's vulnerabilities today. Catch you next time.